twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akwe again on your TV, radio and online. And we're here with you until midday with a show full of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion, expert guests and even our opinions as well.
And as ever, make sure you get in touch with your views on the usual. It's GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those throughout the show. But first, it's time for your latest news.
Thank you. Good morning. It's 1 minute past 10. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Legal history is being made today as the sentencing in a criminal trial is shown live on television for the very first time. The judge's comments will be broadcast from the Old Bailey in a manslaughter case. 25-year-old Ben Oliver pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London. Chair of the Bar Council, Mark Fennells QC, says it's about making sure justice is seen to be done.
We don't want the Crown Court used for entertainment. This is a matter of public education, public information and confidence in the justice system. If the public can see and hear why certain sentences are being passed, they'll be more confident that the judges are doing the right thing for the right reasons. And that can only be a good thing as far as we're concerned.
Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going head-to-head in Leeds tonight in the first round of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending are expected to be the big battlegrounds as the leadership candidates tour the country, hoping to secure party members' votes. The ballot to decide who gets the keys to number 10 closes on September the 2nd. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is voting for Liz Truss.
On September the 5th is somebody who has fresh, invigorating, stimulating ideas and an approach to the economy. I think that's what Liz is offering. She's not somebody who buys into the Treasury orthodoxy. She's someone who thinks economically outside the box. She understands the value of putting money into people's pockets, and you achieve that. One of the ways to achieve that.
Meanwhile, Tory MP Victoria Atkins is backing the former Chancellor and says Rishi Sunak is all for cutting tax, provided it's done cautiously.
Rishi was talking about tax cuts at the last budget last year, but we've got to do this responsibly. What we've been able to do to announce this week is this curb on, or this cut on VAT on energy, which will help not just the poorest in society, which many of the measures that Rishi has already put in place help the most vulnerable. We want to help those people in the middle as well.
Tom Daley's among those carrying the Queen's baton at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games tonight. The Olympic gold medal-winning diver will help other British athletes kick off proceedings at the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham. The Prince of Wales will read a message from the Queen contained inside the baton. It's been carried for 294 days across all 72 nations that make up the Commonwealth. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is also in Birmingham today for the Games amid an ongoing row in his party over the sacking of a frontbencher. Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry was fired after defying Sir Keir's ban on joining the picket line with striking rail workers. Train services are still disrupted today after yesterday's strike caused travel chaos. Unions have announced a further strike this Saturday and on August the 13th. Britain's electricity system operator is warning supply might be tight this winter. It's forecasting capacity may narrow significantly towards the very end of the year, but it believes it should be able to keep the lights on. The ESO says that 4 coal power stations are ready to go if they're needed. Economics expert Vicky Price says the war in Ukraine has had an effect on energy supply and prices.
Russia cutting supplies to Europe and how it will affect us. Now, the question is, of course, whether we can rely on other sources of gas. We get it from Norway, mostly, the extra gas that we need, plus, of course, whatever we can do in terms of renewable energy that can be used more in the homes. But there is a limit to do that. And, of course, as we know, we still depend hugely on gas, I'm afraid, in terms of heating homes. And that's going to be the real problem.
Kim Jong-un claims North Korea has a nuclear deterrent. In a speech, the North Korean leader accused the United States of conspiring with South Korea to commit subversive acts and demonising his country. He went on to criticise the new South Korean Prime Minister Yoon Suk-yeol, calling his administration belligerent and treacherous. The actor Bernard Cribbins has died, aged 93. Famous for narrating The Wombles and starring in The Railway Children, Doctor Who and the Carry On films, his career spanned 7 decades. And England will face Germany in the Euro 2022 final this Sunday at Wembley. It's after the 8-time European champions beat France 2-1 in yesterday's match. The Lionesses won their spot in the semi-final after beating Sweden 4-0 on Tuesday. They're now just 1 game away from glory. Fingers crossed. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Nana and Mercy.
Good morning. The time is 10:07. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Mercy Moroki, and I'm joined by Nana Akwe again on your TV, radio and online. And we've got another show lined up for you to kickstart your day. Here's what's coming up.
Right, so in the next half hour, we're expecting legal history to be made as cameras will be allowed in court for the very first time for the sentencing in a manslaughter case. We'll cross live to the Alison Bailey for that one.
Yes, and fears have grown that energy bills could rise to £4,000 a year as Russia cuts yet more of its gas supply to Europe. The biggest risk, once again, is for pensioners in the winter, as experts warn that costs could increase to a monthly average of £500.
Then we'll look at Ukraine as it's stepping up its fight against Vladimir Putin as reports claim a counter-offensive to retake Kherson will soon be ready. Now, if successful, it could represent a turning of the tide in the region for the president and his army.
Yes, and is OnlyFans a way to empower women, or does it just commodify women's bodies? That's the question we'll be debating with an OnlyFans content creator who says the platform is a, quote, safe space, and an author as well will be joined by, who says online pornography is malevolent. Stay tuned for that.
So all of that is on the way and much more across the programme. As ever, you can get in touch with your views. It's the usual. It's GBNews at gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy, but first let's talk legal history.
Yes. Yes, well, legal history is being made this morning as the sentencing of a manslaughter case takes place live on TV for the first time ever. The sentencing is in the case of 25-year-old Ben Oliver, who pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London last year.
Now let's look ahead to this historic legal event with our home and security editor, Mark White. Now, Mark, talk us through, because I can remember back in the day I used to watch Crown Court. Mercy wouldn't have been around for that at all. But talk about what this actually means, because is there a camera actually in the courtroom filming everything? What exactly does it represent?
Yeah, I think I remember Crown Court as well. It got huge audiences for daytime television. This is not that. It's not the Americanization of the court system in which a full trial will be televised. There's no way that the judiciary would ever have accepted that, and many lawyers as well. They would see that as actually something that would be detrimental to the smooth running of the court system, that would put many witnesses off, for instance, the thought that their trial was likely to be, and their evidence was likely to be televised. What it is instead is the judge's sentencing remarks. So a live camera feed will come from the court, but it will be trained on the judge only, as that judge, Sarah Monroe, passes sentence on Ben Oliver, a 25-year-old man who pleaded guilty to stabbing his bedridden grandfather to death in January of last year. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. What's happening in court at the moment, in about 5 minutes or so it'll get underway, but we'll hear the prosecution set out the history of the case itself, then the defence for Ben Oliver putting forward the mitigation, in other words, reasons why they think that he should get a lesser sentence. One of the reasons, for instance, is that he is believed to suffer from Asperger's on the spectrum, and that was one of the reasons why the Crown accepted a plea of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. So all that, interesting though it is, you won't get party to, but what you will have then, after the judge goes out to consider her verdict, or her sentence I should say, is that she will come back into court, and that's what we'll get live. We're told it's about 5 to 10 minutes maximum, and then Sarah Monroe will pass that sentence, give the reasons why she is imposing whatever that sentence. It will be a custodial sentence, there is no doubt about that, and some explanation about that. So it's open justice. The Ministry of Justice, the judiciary want, after 10 years of campaigning by the broadcasters, to now allow those television cameras in. But as I say, it's not the Americanisation of the court system with full trials on. It will just be the sentencing remarks, but still fascinating and still a historical moment.
Okay, well, I mean, it's sort of great to look forward to that anyway. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. That's Mark.
Yeah, I watch Court TV often. It's the American version of what you were saying, and they obviously broadcast their trials, their criminal trials as well. So this is something that's going to be quite fascinating to me. I think most people aren't very aware how justice is carried out in British courts, so it'd be a good insight into that.
I'll say a lot of time it isn't carried out as far as I'm concerned. I'd probably bring back the death penalty, but we won't go there today.
Well, let's move on to something else. If we weren't already struggling with the cost of living crisis, energy bills could reach nearly £4,000 per year this winter. And the price of fresh food has also risen by 8% due to higher fertiliser and petrol costs. That's according to figures from the British Retail Consortium. Now, this all comes as the European Union leaders agreed to deal to curb natural gas consumption. That's amid the fears that Russian leader Vladimir Putin could try and blackmail Europe by restricting gas and oil exports. Yes, well, joining us now in our studio to discuss this further are our consumer champion, Will Hodgson, consumer champion, How to Save It, and our economics and business editor. I think we can't speak today. I don't know what's happened. I don't know, you gave it to me first. Economics and business editor.
They're nervous in our presence, that's what it is.
Yeah, you're making us nervous, boys. No, but you're not.
What is going on with all of this? Because is it, I mean, OK, so there's food inflation, obviously, and there's obviously fuel inflation. Prices have soared from their highest from about 2005 in July. What is going on? Why is this happening? Liam, I'm going to start with you.
Well, inflation was already at a 30-year high before the war in Ukraine, so in January and into February. In late February, of course, the invasion of Ukraine happened. That led to another spike in wholesale energy prices. Russia, of course, is one of the world's biggest exporters of oil, and particularly gas to Western Europe. 40% of our natural gas comes from Russia. And Russia and Ukraine, between them, are also agricultural powerhouses and also huge fertiliser producers, as Mercy just mentioned, those fertiliser prices. And fertiliser, a lot of it is produced using natural gas. So it's kind of like a upward spiral of price rises, fuel, food, as farmers will tell you. The reason I think we're talking about this today isn't just because of those figures from the British Retail Consortium, but also because wholesale energy prices are spiking again. The European Commission has admitted it will have to engage in some kind of gas rationing this winter as Russia limits the amount of gas coming through that Nord Stream pipeline between Russia and Germany. But also we've had a couple of estimates out over the last few hours from leading energy consultancies saying that the off-gem energy price cap, when it's implemented again this coming autumn, having gone up from roughly £2,000 to £3,000 in April, could go up again to almost £4,000, even more on some estimates, because those wholesale gas and energy prices are higher, and those higher prices get passed on to consumers. One thing clear to me, it's not good enough for ministers to say, we'll wait and see. They have to put a package of measures in place, or people are going to get really, really worried about this.
And Will, just...
Off-gem, it's almost useless, isn't it?
Yeah, Will, just give us some idea of what protection, so to speak, consumers have, because there will be tens of thousands of people who simply will not be able to pay their bills. I mean, what's going to happen to those people?
But I agree with Liam. We need help. We need it urgently. So the first thing to start with is what's being done already. Now, the Treasury have put out packages including £400 off everyone's bill. You've got targeted help in the form of discounts on your council tax, and also an extra £650 for certain means-targeted benefits. But that might not be enough. That was when we thought that prices were going to go up to £3,000. Now it's going to go north of £3,000, which is why you've got the two contenders to be our next Prime Minister almost competing about what they can chop off our bills in the short term. Now, what I'd emphasise is this is not just a short-term challenge. In the medium term, there's another way you can reduce your bills, right? You go to what money have I got to pay it? How much is the wholesale cost? But also, fundamentally, how much am I actually using? And that comes down to energy efficiency measures, which I think in the medium term is where smart households in Britain are going to save the most money.
But, I mean, look, I mean, this is, as you said, it's very short-term. It's giving a bit of money here, giving a bit of money there. Doesn't really solve the problem. Part of this, to me, in my view, is the fact that we privatised all of this stuff. And if we owned it or we had more energy security then and food security, we wouldn't be reliant in this way. So as a longer-term vision, what do you think, then, the government could be doing to sort of make it so that... Because otherwise, this is just going to keep rolling and rolling and rolling. You're at the mercy of China, you're at the mercy of Russia, you're at the mercy of everybody else, and we're not sustaining our own...
Well, fundamentally, this is the story about being completely reliant on fossil fuels and using too much of it. So I think the story is trying to wean yourself off the most expensive sources of electricity, because bear in mind, people think, why has my electricity bill gone up? I thought it was gas that's gone up in prices. 40% of our electricity comes from gas. So it's about exploring those new sources of energy that break the kind of stranglehold that gas, and in particular Putin, have on our electricity.
This is about net zero, in my view. I mean, the net zero agenda, closing down the coal mines, not fracking and doing all the things and being completely energy reliant. A lot of people are looking at this net zero target now and saying it is not really realistic.
Well, hang on a second.
Hang about. Let me have a say.
No, I want to speak to Liam.
I don't know if that's right.
Liam.
It's two of us. OK, so Liz Truss has obviously put forward plans to suspend, not scrap, but suspend those renewable energy subsidies on electricity. That's about a quarter of our electricity bills. I think
it's not a quarter, it's 8%. It's not a quarter, that's an exaggeration.
It depends. It depends on how you do it, and it's a lot more than a quarter of business bills. So across the piece, across the economy, it is roughly that. By the way, Liz Truss, I think, has made a lot of headway with that. It strikes me that Rishi Sunak will also have to do something along those lines if he wants to stay in this competition. He's come up yesterday and said that he wants to remove VAT on fuel bills. But that will only be about 5%. It won't happen in Northern Ireland. 5% of £3,000 isn't very much money. Indeed, it's about £150,000, £160,000. So I do think ministers will have to do more. You know, last week we ended up buying some electricity from Belgium, the national grid, at the very last moment at a hugely inflated price to prevent a blackout.
I saw that, yeah.
So the danger we have this autumn, and I don't want to be alarmist about this, but as a journalist and an analyst, I don't want to, you know, shield what's actually happening. If we want to remove the risk of blackouts, the kind of thing that we experienced as kids, Nana, during the mid and late 70s, and if we want to avoid, you know, non-payment of bills, there is going to have to be some more assistance given, not just to lower income families where, as we've heard rightly, there has been more assistance, but the squeezed middle as well.
Well, it was like £9,724 per megawatt hour to import that from Belgium, which is an astronomical figure and something that's totally unsustainable. But the government can't keep giving us handouts like that because, as you said, that tiny amount, OK, we'll give you £150 off, we'll give you £400 here, that can't carry on. I think it's almost like a COVID frenzy. We've got used to being receiving things. Something more has to happen to change the whole dynamic.
Yeah, well, long term, what you're looking for is to actually have sources of energy which are cheaper than gas, right? Now, VAT is an interesting one, because actually I was campaigning for this back in 2016. The issue that I've always turned over in my head with VAT is, whereas we've been giving £400 to every household, people are saying, well, actually, shouldn't we give more to the poorer households who are struggling the most? VAT will end up giving up, as a cut, 5%, they actually end up giving more money to the best of households because they're spending the most on their energy, right? So that's something to consider. I think that what we absolutely need to look at for the winter coming up is energy efficiency, though, because that, I think, strips away any debate about net zero, about energy security. If you're using less energy, you have a lower bill.
Yeah, can I just ask, actually, because we don't have long on this, but we're talking a lot about long-term / medium-term solutions, and there'll be families at home saying, OK, well, I have a bill coming up at the end of this month. What should I be doing? What can I be doing to save money for myself and my family in the immediate term? Ask this question to both of you. Liam, what is your advice to immediate-term savings that households can be making?
I think we saw in the last debate when a hard-pressed householder asked Rishi Sunak about her energy bill, he started talking about insulating her loft, and the look on her face was, do you have any idea what it's like to not be able to pay a bill? Of course, in the medium term, lagging in insulation is really important. We have a really old housing stock in this country. Lots of it is really badly insulated, and we do need to get our arms around that problem. In the short term, though, I know the Treasury argue that VAT cuts give more money to wealthier people, but on the other hand, lower income households spend a much higher proportion of their income on their fuel. Maybe the VAT cuts can be targeted. Maybe they can be targeted by council tax bans, for instance. That's quite a good way to get the help, hopefully, to those who need it most.
What about you, Will?
I'd agree with that. I think it is fanciful to imagine that everyone in the country can start to insulate their loft. Although I would recommend that people check out their energy performance certificate, because there are some things that you can do which are really quick. Literally, you invite someone over, in the course of an afternoon, they can close up the gaps in your windows and doors, and that could end up saving you £50, £100, £200 a year.
Yeah, that's great, but somebody's got to pay for that, and perhaps the government should... They have been talking about insulation, but who would have thought to insulate Britain? We knew they were right, but don't glue your hands to anything. Listen, Will, it's really good to talk to you. That's Will Hodgson, he's a consumer champion, and also Liam Halligan, he's our GBNews business and economics editor. Thank you so much.
Yes. And remember, you can catch Liam with even more details of all of this on his show, On the Money, begins at 1 p.m. every day. Well, every weekday, isn't it? Liam?
Every week.
And today, including today.
Right, so on the way after the break, the war in Ukraine continues. But could we be about to see a Ukrainian counter-attack to take back territory from Russia?
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory.
twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning, it's 10:25, and this is To The Point with myself, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akua on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Right, so the war in Ukraine now, it's now entered its 155th day. I mean, many expected the Russian army to rapidly take over, but Ukrainian resistance has defied the assertions of many experts and commentators.
Yes, well, the CIA and MI6 estimate that around 15,000 Russian soldiers have been killed since the start of the conflict, although Ukrainian President Zelensky claims that that figure is 40,000. Now Ukrainian forces are expected to launch a counter-offensive to take back the southern city of Kherson. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense warned Russian forces that they face a, quote, retreat or be annihilated.
So joining us now to talk about this in more detail is Philip Ingram, MBE. He's a former senior military intelligence officer. Phil, thank you so much for coming to join us now. Now, I was reading about this particular conflict that the Russians were very entrenched. They've even brought their own concrete sort of shelters to protect themselves. How are Ukraine potentially going to be able to try and defeat the Russian army in Kherson?
Well, the Russian advances in the east and what they were doing in the south around the Kherson area have effectively stalled. You're quite right in saying there have been reports of the Russians building up their defences in the area because they don't have the manoeuvre capability. They're beginning to bring in older equipment to try and prosecute their operations. The Ukrainians, in the meantime, have given up a little bit of land to give them some time. They've used that time to bring in new Western equipment to get their troops trained on it, and they're starting to feel that, which means that they've got much better artillery, they've got much better rockets. We've heard of the HIMARS system and all the rest of it, and they're using that to attack the Russian supply depots and their command posts, as well as using the closer-in artillery to attack the defensive positions and prepare for this, or seemingly prepare for this counteroffensive in the south.
Now, I want to ask you about the worry is because, OK, so Ukraine managed to retake Kherson. Will this not mean that we have repercussions from Vladimir Putin, so restricting the supply of more gas to Europe, which then affects us again, and also restricting the supply of grain and potentially stopping it from leaving the port of Odessa?
Well, I think no matter what option is taken, that is almost an inevitability. You know, Putin has lost everything that he's tried to do so far. His main effort initially was to try and capture Kyiv and to topple the Ukrainian government. He's failed to do that. He was then trying to capture, and is still trying to capture, the whole of the Donbass region, but he's still having real difficulty in doing that. And the reason for doing that was to open this land bridge from Crimea up through the Donbass and into Russia. And if the Ukrainians manage to successfully counterattack into Kherson and then can push further south, they can cut off that land bridge into Crimea, putting Putin in a very, very difficult position indeed. And he will be trying to fracture international support. That's what he's doing by using gas as a weapon and using grain as a weapon. He wants the international community not to support Ukraine because it's that support that is hurting Russia economically, but also hurting Russia militarily on the ground.
I wonder how long you think the support the West has been granting Ukraine can go on for. Of course, we've just been speaking not long ago about the fact that people domestically are facing a whole load of crises, whether it's cost of living, whether it's being able to travel around. Do you think that the support for supporting Ukraine will wane over time as people say, hang on, we just need to spend the money here domestically?
I think in some countries it might start to wane, but I think in the majority of the countries and the majority of the countries that have got real influence, it won't. And it can't, because if we let it wane and the Russians begin to win, they're going to come back again. This crisis is going to come back in 3, 5, 7 years' time, and worse than it is. And actually, if we give in, other countries like China will turn around and say, well, the West gave in to Russia and Ukraine, therefore that's a green light for us to do things in Taiwan. So on a global basis, if we don't see this through to the end, it could potentially be hugely worse than we've got at the moment. And unfortunately, a war in Europe like it is coming in the back of a pandemic, there is going to be pain, and the population are going to suffer it, and we're suffering it in our pockets. We're not suffering it in the same way that the Ukrainians are suffering it, where they're losing children, families, housing, and everything else being destroyed, and the horrors that they're suffering are frightening.
Now, when you say if we don't see this through to the end, what do you think the end looks like?
Well, the end, from my perspective, in Ukraine has to be the restoration of Ukrainians' territorial boundaries to pre-2014 levels. So that is the recapture of the disputed Donbas region, pushing Russian and Russian influence out, and the recapture of Crimea again and pushing Russia and Russian influence out, which would inevitably lead to the toppling of Vladimir Putin.
Well, let's hope that sometime soon. Philip Ingram, MBE, thank you very much for joining us. He's a former senior military intelligence officer. It's good to talk to you. And just on a breaking line, that about 104,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived via the visa scheme as of Monday. That's according to government figures.
Yes. Now we're going to take a short break, but coming up after that break is a conversation about the adult online content platform OnlyFans, because it's causing controversy. It has been for a while. It's just repackaged. Is it just repackaged lads mags for the 21st century? Or actually, there's something more sinister and damaging going on. We'll be discussing that after this break. But before that, here's your headlines.
It's 10:32. Here's the latest from the GB newsroom. Legal history is being made today as the sentencing in a criminal trial is shown live on television for the very first time. The judge's comments will be broadcast from the Old Bailey in a manslaughter case. 25-year-old Ben Oliver pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going head-to-head in Leeds tonight in the first round of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending are expected to be the big battlegrounds as the leadership candidates tour the country, hoping to secure party members' votes. The ballot to decide who gets the keys to number 10 closes on September the 2nd. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is backing Liz Truss.
Liz isn't talking about business as usual. She's talking about making this country a place that has an invigorating economy and a place where people want to invest and list and stay. And her ideas are exciting, and I think that's the reason why she will be best placed to help people.
Tom Daley's among those carrying the Queen's baton at the opening ceremony of the Commonwealth Games tonight. The Olympic gold medal winning diver will help other British athletes kick off proceedings at the Alexander Stadium in Birmingham. The Prince of Wales will read a message from the Queen contained inside the baton. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer's in Birmingham too today for the Games amid an ongoing row in his party over the sacking of a frontbencher. Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry was fired after defying Sir Keir's ban on joining the picket line with striking rail workers. Train services are still disrupted today after yesterday's strike caused travel chaos. Unions have announced a further strike this Saturday and on August the 13th. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound buys you $1.218 and 1.193 euros. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,432.90 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. It's just approaching 37 minutes after 10 o'clock. This is To The Point with me, Nana Akwe and Mercy Moroki. We're live on GB News, online, on digital radio and also on TV.
Yes, now we're just going to go to some views before we're going to get into a discussion very shortly about OnlyFans, the platform, adult content platform. I don't know what it describes itself as, but let's go to some views. We spoke about energy price rises. Michelle said increases have already started. My provider has increased electricity supply from the 1st of July by 27.5%.
That's a lot, isn't it? And then we've got here standing charges on bills. Why do we have standing charges on bills? Does anyone think... I mean, it's interesting that, so that's the question, but nobody's told us who that's from, so that's interesting. But why do we have them?
Yeah, because my mum was asking me, why has it gone up so much? I mean, obviously she knows that the price of the electricity has gone up. But she says my bills seem to have increased by way more than the price increase for electricity. And I told her the standing charges have also gone up quite massively.
I switch off all the plugs. I go around, I switch off every single plug.
When you have children, you have to keep reminding them, switch off that light when you leave the room.
Well, when you've got a teenager, oh my God. Literally, when my daughter turned 13, well, just 12 and 3/4, she started turning into Kevin the teenager, like, leaves the lights on, leaves everything. Honestly, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Cost of producing energy. I don't know who this is. Isn't it time someone said that the global prices don't really give a full picture of how much it costs to produce electricity, for example? And that's true. It's very complicated. It's not as easy and as cheap to do all these things as people might assume. But regardless of all of that, it's still the case that there will be people in this country who simply will not be able to afford that. No matter how many savings they make in other areas of their life, they still will not be able to afford their bills. And that's going to be the hard reality that the next Prime Minister will really have to get to grips with.
Yeah, I can't keep giving handouts like that. It's not going to work. I genuinely think that we need to sort of have a relook at that net zero. And actually later on in the second hour, we'll be talking about CO2 and all of that. So do stay tuned to that. Also, we will be bringing you our first sort of look into that live trial, the first time ever.
Yes.
You know,
I'm excited.
That is on the way.
Yes, indeed. But before that, let's speak about this. And just a warning to parents. We know it's not half-term, summer holidays. And so if you do have young ears listening or watching, then you may want to move them to another room as we're going to discuss a conversation that entails adult themes, shall we say. We're talking about OnlyFans, and those of you who haven't heard of it, it's an online subscription service with around 50 million users, most of which post explicit adult or pornographic content, the people producing the content on this app.
Now, there are around about 1 million content creators on OnlyFans, and OnlyFans gets to keep 20% of the money that they earn, although there is no guarantee that they'll earn any money at all. And loads of celebrities have OnlyFans accounts. Not me, darlings, not me. Not yet, anyway.
What a
not until I
shame.
get
You've
really
broken
desperate.
many hearts.
I do think, well, you know, these people make quite a bit of money out of it. Other celebrities doing this are Kerry Katona, you've got Katie Price, and people like Cardi B, to name but a few.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie, though. Cardi B, Katie Price and Kerry Katona aren't exactly icons I aspire to be like, to be honest. So then I wouldn't say they're necessarily great poster women for OnlyFans or for anything. But the emergence of OnlyFans has sparked some discussion. Is this just a lad's mag, basically, for the 21st century? Or is there something more sinister about having to market adult images and videos of yourself across the internet? And is it right to put this type of adult content online with no guarantee of any sort of payment in return?
So joining us to discuss this in more detail is Louise Perry, campaigner and author of The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. Thank you so much for joining us. So, Louise, where do you stand on this concept of OnlyFans?
Morning. I think that OnlyFans has been hugely overhyped, particularly in terms of what it's supposed to promise is that I think most people recognise that there are problems with the porn industry, that it's a very exploitative industry, that it has a really destructive effect on both its producers and its consumers. And the OnlyFans is supposed to be a way of breaking away from that. It's supposed to be a way of cutting out the middleman so that you have creators directly interacting with their customers and taking home a lot more of the profit and having a lot more work flexibility and so on. The problem is I don't think it does that, and it's been fated as a means of women working for themselves, making lots of money, particularly during the pandemic when everyone was feeling strapped for cash. OnlyFans presented itself as this brand new means.
Sorry to interrupt you. Please hold that thought, because we are just going to go live to the courts where legal history is being made as the sentencing of a manslaughter trial takes place live for the first time.
January of this year, you pleaded guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. You were tried and acquitted of murder by a jury on the 25th of May. The facts upon which I am to sentence you are these. Your grandfather, David, and grandmother, Susan, married in 1966. They had a biological son together, and then in 1977, they adopted your mother, Stephanie, when she was aged 10. Stephanie has a history of severe physical and mental ill health, and has spent much of her adult life in hospital. However, in 1996, when she was aged 20, she became pregnant by a man called James, and you were born in 1997. You had a congenital hearing impediment. Your biological father left your mother shortly after your birth, and your mother formed a relationship with a man called Steve. They had 2 daughters together. Steve was extremely cruel to you. He was physically violent, and you were subjected to a sexualized environment and introduced to child pornography at the age of 5. You were also sexually assaulted by a neighbour. When you were 13, your mother videoed Steve assaulting you. The police were involved, and that resulted in your mother and Steve separating. You also had a very difficult time at school due to your deafness, and you were the victim of severe bullying. You were diagnosed with autism at a young age and went to school for autistic children, but you did not thrive there. Your behaviour deteriorated further when your mother became involved in a same-sex relationship. You were in and out of care, and irreparably damaged by your early childhood experiences and by your learning disabilities. Throughout your childhood and adult life, you had a very strong and positive relationship with your maternal grandparents. You loved and love your Nan very much, and she loved and still loves you. Her evidence at your trial was compelling and informative. You clearly displayed many of the recognised features of autistic spectrum disorder, and you lacked the ability to show empathy to others, with the exception of your Nan and, to some extent, your granddad, until shortly before his death. When you were 15 and 16, you sexually abused a very young female child, and in September 2016, you received a 6-year custodial sentence for a number of offences, including rape and an offence of in possession of indecent images of children. I pause there to record my firm view, as supported by the psychiatric evidence, that the offending in which you were involved was learned from your own childhood experiences, and your lack of empathy or understanding was exacerbated by and rooted in your autism. You have no other convictions. However, you were on licence from that sentence when you killed your grandfather. Days before you were sent to custody in 2016, your grandfather had a stroke which left him paralysed, save for the partial use of his right side. He was largely bedbound and looked after by your grandmother, supported by daily carers. While you were serving your sentence, you were the victim of violence at the hands of other prisoners. You were prescribed medication for your autism and depression whilst you were in custody. You were released on licence in September 2019. While you were still in custody, allegations came to light that your grandfather had himself committed child sex offences. Both your mother and your uncle expressed a serious desire and formed intent to kill your grandfather, and had to be dissuaded by your grandmother from doing so. From that time, your Nan lost all respect for her husband, who'd also been cruel to her and unfaithful during their marriage. Upon your release, you were given a flat about 7 miles away from where your grandparents lived. Initially, you were very house-proud and you did very well until the pandemic hit. You later found out about the allegations of sexual abuse involving your grandfather, and you told your Nan that you could not love him anymore, and that indeed you hated him. However, at that stage, you did not exhibit any violence towards him, nor express any desire to do so. COVID hit you very hard. You became obsessive about catching the virus and behaved in very extreme ways in order to avoid doing so. You also became paranoid about infecting your grandparents and avoided contact with them. Your mental health deteriorated as a result because you were isolated and separated from your grandmother. On Christmas Eve 2020, you went to your grandmother's house and asked her to help you to commit suicide by providing for you an overdose of tablets. You said that you wanted to die in her arms. She comforted you and she dissuaded you. You stayed at your grandparents' house for Christmas, but then returned to your flat on the 27th of December. From that date onwards, you would speak to your Nan on the phone 3 or 4 times every hour. On the 6th of January of 2021, you rang your Nan again, intent on killing yourself. She tried to persuade you not to do so, but you called the RSPCA and asked them to collect your pet ferret, telling the operator that you were going to commit suicide. The operator noted that you were speaking most bizarrely and making very little sense. That call was recorded, and the jury heard the nature of the things which you were saying, which were psychotic in nature. Of particular concern is your assertion in that call that you'd been looking at child pornography and had exposed yourself. On that occasion, you were taken to hospital, but due to your autism, you did not understand that you were expected to stay there, and instead you took a taxi to your nan's house. She wanted you to stay with her, but you went back to your flat because of concern for your pet. You were in no fit state to be left unsupervised. Your nan said that by then, quotes, we all knew he wasn't well and tried to get him an appointment, close quotes. On the 14th of January, you attempted suicide again, firstly by trying to hang yourself and then by drinking bathwater contaminated with bleach. You were taken to accident and emergency, but released to the home treatment team. Your nan described you on that day as, quotes, absolutely tormented. You were only relaxed if you could lie next to your nan and hold her arm. Your medication was increased, and your home treatment team was then changed from the team which had been looking after you near your flat to the one near your grandparents. From the 15th of January, you never left your nan's address again until your arrest for murder. You spent your days with your nan and continued to speak about demons who were out to get you. At about this time, your mother told you that she would not have peace until your grandfather was dead. You also knew by then how unhappy he had made your grandmother. On the 18th of January, you watched a film with your nan about an abused orphan and texted your mother about the effect that film had had upon you. On the morning of the killing, the 19th of January, the carers came as usual to see to your grandfather's needs. When they had gone, your nan took him a biscuit and a cup of coffee. That was the last time she saw him alive. She noted that you were jittery and couldn't rest. You asked to lie down next to her, which you did. However, when she got up, you then went downstairs. It was about 11:30 or 11:45 that morning. You selected a knife from the kitchen and you went to your grandfather's room. You then cut his throat repeatedly with severe force. You stabbed his mouth so that he could not cry out and his eyes so that he couldn't look at you as you killed him. He tried in vain to protect himself by raising his right arm. He was utterly powerless. There were a total of 21 stab wounds to the face, 7 to the torso, and obvious defence injuries. He died very quickly of massive blood loss. Following the killing, you told your nan what you had done, saying, quotes, he can't hurt you anymore, Nan. You also texted your mother saying, quotes, Mum, I've killed Grandad. I love you. Your nan called 999 and you sat with her. At one point you went upstairs and sat on the windowsill. I'm satisfied that you had it in mind to jump to your death, but your nan persuaded you to come in and you calmly sat with her until the police arrived. You were entirely cooperative. Your nan told the police, quotes, we all wanted to kill him, close quotes. That was a reference to your granddad. While you were in custody before your trial, there were numerous mental health assessments which resulted in a divergence of opinion as to the true nature and extent of your mental illness. The psychiatrists instructed on your behalf for your trial had access to all your records and had greater expertise in determining the true position. In the light of the jury's verdict, I propose to proceed on the basis that the defence experts, Dr. Cumming and Dr. Coe, were correct in their diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder, depression and adjustment disorder, the latter as a result of finding out about the allegations of sexual abuse by the deceased. Their view was that your diagnosed medical conditions substantially impaired your ability to form a rational judgment. You did not think that there was an alternative to killing your granddad. You did not think about the consequences and did not have the skills to manage conflict or to see the bigger picture due to your obsessional and tunnel vision. On the other hand, you did understand that you were killing your granddad and had decided to do so. This is a complex sentencing exercise. Firstly, I have to apply the Sentencing Council guideline for this type of manslaughter. I begin by assessing the level of responsibility which you retained for the killing. There are 3 levels: high, medium, and lower. I have decided that the level of responsibility retained by you was towards the very top of the medium level range, noting that there is an overlap between that range and the range for a high level of retained responsibility. I take that view because, unlike some cases of this kind, you were not psychotic. Your autism was defined as significant but not severe. You made the determined decision to kill your granddad, and you carried out the killing in a ferocious but controlled way, making conscious decisions to attack his eyes and mouth, knowing that you were killing him and why you were doing so. The relevance of your mental abnormality is that which was articulated by the psychiatrist called on your behalf, as I have set out above. As the author of the pre-sentence report states, quotes, "Because of your past experiences, you did not have the resilience or skills to cope with these disclosures, and your emotional well-being plummeted. For all those reasons, I take a starting point for sentence of 24 years imprisonment. I then have to turn to consider aggravating factors. They are 4. 1, the vulnerability of your bed-bound elderly grandfather. 2, the physical suffering inflicted upon him. 3, your previous offending. And 4, the fact that you were on licence. In relation to mitigation, I firstly point out that your abnormality of mental functioning has already been accounted for in the reduction of the offence from murder to manslaughter. However, there is considerable additional mitigation in relation to your upbringing, your experiences as a child, and the fact that other members of your family, to your knowledge, wanted and on 2 occasions set out to kill your grandfather due to the unproven allegations made against him. Of further significance is your recent discovery that he had hurt your beloved grandmother. In addition, it is to your credit that you have always accepted your guilt and told the truth about what you did and why. You have also expressed remorse, telling the probation officer, quotes, "I've just made it worse, made the pain greater." There was ample evidence that you had tried to seek help for your mental health problems and had done well whilst on licence. It is unfortunate that the professionals did not identify the risk posed by you remaining in the community, and particularly by placing you with your grandparents. Dr. Cumming has provided an addendum report which confirms that a hospital order is not an option in your case. He describes you as a very damaged man who will require psychological work in the longer term. In my view, the mitigating factors balance out the aggravating factors so that I do not add to the notional term of 24 years. I then have to consider dangerousness. The probation officer has accurately set out the relevant considerations, and I agree with her assessment and the reasons for it. In my judgment, you do present a significant risk to the public, occasioned by the commission of further specified offences, due firstly to your previous serious offending, secondly the fact that there is evidence that you have a continuing interest in illegal pornography, thirdly the suddenness of your deterioration, and fourthly the seriousness and ferocity of the attack upon your grandfather. You therefore fit the criteria for a dangerous offender. Section 285 of the Sentencing Act 2020 provides that as I have determined you meet the dangerousness criteria, I then have to decide whether the seriousness of the offence of manslaughter is such as to justify the imposition of imprisonment for life. If I do conclude that it does, I then must impose such a sentence. In your case, I do consider that the seriousness of the offence justifies a life sentence, and that is the sentence I must therefore impose upon you. I have already determined that the notional determinate term would be 24 years before credit for your plea of guilty. In my view, you deserve full credit for your plea of guilty, which was entered at the first reasonable opportunity after you were deemed fit to plead. That plea reduces the notional determinate term to one of 16 years. In setting the minimum term which you must serve before you can be considered for release by the parole board, I must adopt a term which is 2/3 of the notional determinate term, which in this case gives 10 years and 8 months. Would you stand up, please? The sentence I pass upon you is therefore one of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 10 years and 8 months. From that term will be deducted the term you have spent on remand, which is 553 days. That deduction results in a term of 9 years and 63 days. Those numbers can be amended administratively if my calculation is incorrect. Once you have served that term, you will be entitled to apply for parole. However, you will not be released by the parole board unless they conclude that you no longer pose a risk to the public. If you are released, you will remain on licence for the rest of your life. I impose the appropriate surcharge. That concludes these sentencing remarks, and he may go down. Thank you.
First, that was, of course, Judge Sarah Monroe sentencing in the case of 25-year-old Ben Oliver. We do apologise for the graphic nature of some of the commentary in there, but it was illegal first, and we did want to bring you that.
Yes, indeed. Well, let's get a reaction to this historic legal event with our Home and Security Editor, Mark White. Mark, that was so fascinating to me. What did you make of it?
Well, I think the first thing really to say is it was a deeply harrowing case, and that set out by the judge Sarah Monroe there as she passed sentence was perfectly evident to those listening on GB News Radio and watching, of course, on television. Absolutely horrific. A young man who had troubled life, to say the very least, who had been abused both physically and sexually by his stepdad and a neighbour who had autism spectrum disorder, who still has that condition, and who really just had a very difficult childhood that led, the judge found, to his own offending behaviour, and no small part was a contributing factor to his own offending behaviour, which resulted in him viewing illegal pornography, then progressing to sexual assault of a minor and also rape, which he served time in prison for. He was abused again, we're told, in prison. And then all of the issues surrounding his grandfather and allegations that his grandfather, although unproven, had been involved in child molestation himself. And as I say, just deeply, deeply harrowing, but a fascinating, I think, insight into the sentencing process, because I think this case really illustrates in stark terms the difficulties that judges have in weighing up what sentence to pass on an individual. Now, you heard, of course, about the aggravating factors, the fact that this man was still effectively of sound mind, that his autism spectrum disorder had not diminished his mental capacity, and that he was still capable of making rational decisions to some extent. But it did impact on that. Also, the aggravating factors, the way in which his grandfather was killed in such a horrific manner, the calculating method of that murder itself. But taking that into account, and we were talking about a 24-year sentence that the judge was considering there. Then, of course, she's taking in the mitigation aspects. Now, mitigation, of course, being all of what we just outlined there about the very troubled nature of this young man's upbringing and what he had suffered himself. The fact that he had sought treatment for his mental health issues, the fact that he had pleaded guilty at the earliest possible stage in this process, the fact as well that this young man had expressed remorse for what he had done right from the outset as well. All of those issues of mitigation were taking into consideration before then. Sarah Munro, the judge, passed that sentence, a life sentence, but a minimum term of 10 years. So in other words, this young man, who will be then 35 in about 10 years' time, will be able to apply for parole at that stage. No guarantee, of course, that he will get parole at that stage. Lots of aspects will have to be weighed up, especially about his mental health at that point in 10 years' time. But as I say, an absolutely fascinating insight into the court process. And I think the judiciary, in allowing the cameras in here, want to show the public what they face on a daily basis when they are passing sentence in the most complex of criminal cases, and all of the issues that they have to take into account when they are passing that sentence.
Thank you for that, as we say, an historic moment there. Very tragic, that particular case, in a whole host of ways. We heard there about the abuse of the gentleman who has now been convicted or sentenced. And, you know, it's tragic what his life has been like, but that is the law, and he has...
It does help you understand why these sentences are made the way they are. Instead of us going, hang them or do this or do this, we understand now the trauma he went through.
And he will be on, even if he does get paroled at the end of that minimum term, he will be on licence for the rest of his life. So he would be liable to be recalled.
Sounded fair.
Yeah.
Well, listen, if you've just joined us, this is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. It's time to pick up the latest news.
Good morning. It's 6 minutes past 11 and I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB Newsroom. As we've just been hearing, legal history's been made today as the sentencing in a criminal trial was shown live on television for the very first time. Judge Sarah Munro QC's comments were broadcast from the Old Bailey in a manslaughter case. She sentenced Ben Oliver to life in prison with a minimum of 10 years after he pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going head-to-head in Leeds tonight in the first round of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending are expected to be the big battlegrounds as the leadership candidates tour the country, hoping to secure party members' votes. The ballot to decide who gets the keys to number 10 closes on September the 2nd. Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is voting for Liz Truss.
On September the 5th is somebody who has fresh, invigorating, stimulating ideas and an approach to the economy. I think that's what Liz is offering. She's not somebody who buys into the Treasury orthodoxy. She's someone who thinks economically outside the box. She understands the value of putting money into people's pockets, and you achieve that. One of the ways to achieve that.
Nadine Dorries in Birmingham there, where the 22nd Commonwealth Games are starting tonight. The opening ceremony, which begins at 8 p.m. at the Alexander Stadium, will be attended by the Prince of Wales. Well, we can now go live to our East Midlands reporter, Will Hollis. Will, what does this mean for the city of Birmingham?
Good morning. Yeah, well, it's monumentous for Birmingham today. You can see all of the people moving around. In fact, you can see from Victoria Square, where they're still building parts of the main stage here at this fan zone. There are, of course, stadiums around the West Midlands, not just Birmingham, that are being used for this historic Commonwealth Games, but there's also 7 neighbourhood fan areas for around Birmingham, as well as 2 city centre ones. 5,000 athletes are coming here to compete from 72 nations, and hundreds of millions of pounds and 4 years worth of preparation have been put in making this Commonwealth Games what is going to be quite literally one of the most special events in recent British history. Now, it's all kicking off tonight at 7 o'clock, only a few miles away from us at Alexander Stadium, where see royalty celebrating the start of this Commonwealth Games in Birmingham.
Will, thank you. Seriously exciting stuff. Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis in Birmingham there for us. Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer is also there for the Games today amid an ongoing row in his party over the sacking of a frontbencher. Shadow Transport Minister Sam Tarry was fired after defying Sir Keir's ban on joining the picket line with striking rail workers. Train services are still disrupted today after yesterday's strike caused travel chaos. Unions have announced a further strike this Saturday and on August the 13th. Britain's electricity system operator is warning supply might be tight this winter. It's forecasting capacity may narrow significantly towards the very end of the year, but it believes it should be able to keep the lights on. The ESO says that 4 coal power stations are ready needed. Economics expert Vicky Price says the war in Ukraine has had an effect on energy supply and prices.
Russia cutting supplies to Europe and how it will affect us. Now, the question is, of course, whether we can rely on other sources of gas. We get it from Norway, mostly, the extra gas that we need, plus, of course, whatever we can do in terms of renewable energy that can be used more in the homes. But there is a limit to do that. And, of course, as we know, we still depend hugely on gas, I'm afraid, in terms of heating homes. And that's going to be the real problem.
The actor Bernard Cribbins has died, aged 93. Famous for narrating The Wombles and starring in The Railway Children, Doctor Who and the Carry On films, Cribbins' career spanned 7 decades. And England will face Germany in the Euro 2022 final this Sunday at Wembley. It's after the 8-time European champions beat France 2-1 in yesterday's match. The Lionesses won their spot in the semi-final after beating Sweden 4-0 on Tuesday. They're now just 1 game away from glory. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now it's back to Nana and Mercy.
Good morning. If you've just joined us, welcome on board. It's just coming up to 12 minutes after 11 o'clock. This is To The Point with me, Nana Akweer, and Mercy Moroki on GB News, on TV, online and on digital radio.
Yes, and we've got another final hour lined up for you. Here's what's coming up.
Now, union leaders have warned Liz Truss not to take them on if she becomes Prime Minister or face more strike action. Sounds a bit like a threat to me. The RMT have called out the Tory leadership favourite for her anti-union pledges and says that they will cause chaos if this is made into law.
Interesting, and also on the programme, the cost of living is still going up across the UK, but Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, went to investigate how the supply crisis is affecting one of the UK's biggest fast food chains and what the public thought about that.
I suppose we'll get used to it, but no, I don't like prices going up either.
Right, also Alison Bailey has won her court case against Garden Court Chambers after the firm discriminated against her views on gender identity and women's rights. Miss Bailey has praised the court for its decision. Also thanked J.K. Rowling for her support during the trial.
Yes, and yet more warnings have been published by the Met Office over climate change. Their new report shows the increased number of extreme weather events last year and the true impact of Storm Arwen on the country's environment. We'll get stuck into all of that very shortly.
Yes, it's all on the way. And loads more as ever. You can always get in touch with us at gbviews@gbnews.uk. But first, Mercy gives her views on the recent discrimination case involving Alison Bailey.
Alison Bailey, a name that may mean nothing to you, but it should, because she is a female barrister who just took on censorious trans activists, extremist bullies, and won. An employment tribunal yesterday ruled that she was unlawfully discriminated against and victimised by senior colleagues at Garden Court Chambers over comments she made on social media expressing criticism over how trans rights activists were infringing on the rights of lesbian and gay people. In 2018, Miss Bailey complained to colleagues about her law chamber's involvement with the Stonewall Diversity Champion scheme. She claimed the charity advocated, quote, trans extremism. Now, the following year, Bailey was involved in setting up the Lesbian and Gay and Bisexual Alliance, LGB Alliance Group, which argues that there's a conflict between the rights of lesbian, gay and bisexual people and transgender people on the other hand. For instance, many trans rights activists genuinely claim that if a lesbian does not want to sleep with a biological male who identifies as a woman, that is tantamount to transphobia, which defies morality and logic. But then again, logic has never been these people's strong suit. Now, the LGBT Alliance, which is a registered charity, claims to have this as one of its core values, reality of biology. They say this on their website. We recognise that sex is binary, female and male, and that for the vast majority of people, sex is determined at conception, observed at birth or in utero, and recorded. Makes sense to me. It also advocates, the LGBT Alliance, for individual freedom. It says that it rejects that men who identify as women should, without question, have the right to access women's spaces or have a right to be accepted as sexual partners by lesbians, and it believes the same of women who identify as men. Now, Alison Bailey, who has been supported by the likes of J.K. Rowling, who, as we all know, has been a target for trans activist bullies, is a heroine to me. She and the many women who have been taking on hardline trans bullies are trailblazers. And whilst I absolutely do not want to reduce Alison Bailey to her meaningless, immutable characteristic, I think they're worth pointing out. Bailey is a second-generation immigrant. Her parents came to Britain from Jamaica. She's a black lesbian feminist, a true feminist, not one of those new-age faux feminists who try to silence women they disagree with. But she's far more than that. She's been a criminal barrister since I was 5 years old. In fact, as she was studying hard at university, where she got a first-class degree, by the way, she spent her spare time working with women and children's sexual abuse survivors. And yet, the so-called gender activists who claim to care about women and about rights have made her life hell. But Stonewall and all those who blindly follow their extremist orthodoxy couldn't hold a light to her. They could not hold a candle to her. During the hearings, Bailey said that she had been, quote, thrown to the hate mob by her chambers. She also said, quote, what I have never tried to do to anybody in chambers or elsewhere is to say that because you do not agree with me, I'm going to ruin your reputation and deprive you of your livelihood. That has been the stock in trade of the trans rights movement. That's what Alison Bailey said there. And she also said this: we cannot achieve a just outcome for everyone while Stonewall are free to threaten women like me with the loss of our livelihoods and reputations. Stonewall must be held to account. I intend to do just that. Rightly so. Now, in the interest of balance, Garden Court Chambers have issued the following statement. It says, quote, the tribunal found that it could not conclude that Garden Court Chambers as a whole had a practice of treating gender-critical beliefs as bigoted. This confirms our stance, they say. We have maintained throughout that our members, quite reasonably, hold differing views in the complex debate around trans and sex-based rights. They're looking at appealing the ruling. Now, also in the interest of facts, Bailey won her case against her chambers, but she did not win against Stonewall. But she said this on Twitter. She said, I have lost my case against Stonewall, but I have succeeded in exposing Stonewall's conduct and the enormous and, to my mind, malign influence it wields in the workplace and in society more general. Organisations who put Stonewall law before equality law or seek to silence others from lawfully voicing their criticism of Stonewall may be acting unlawfully and will suffer the consequences, even if Stonewall does not. Now, in my view, any organisation, any corporation, any entity, any individual which continues to bankroll Stonewall, you are on the wrong side of history. Any young girl or boy who grows up in a world where they are not free to express freely views about gender will not forgive you. Alison Bailey, on behalf of women all over the country, on behalf of all men and women who care about freedom of expression, who care about rights, thank you.
Fascinating case, and the just it seems obvious. I mean, you can't force somebody who is lesbian to then have to accept that somebody who has male genitalia is female and that they must be attracted to me. It's just an overstretch.
I mean, it seems obvious,
ridiculous.
It is absolutely.
What is this?
But this is what these sorts of people do. They say that common sense views, which are obviously ethical. You know, of course, it's ethical to say if you're a lesbian, you don't have to have, you know, to be with or sleep with a biological male, even if they identify as female. Of course, that's right. But these people take common sense and they say, nope, you're transphobic. Any view that doesn't fit with ours, we're going to try and ruin your livelihood. We're going to try and have you lose your job. And we're going to make you a pariah, basically, in society. And so when people, often women, in fact, in almost all cases, it's women who stand up to these, who I call trans extremist bullies, and they win. There has been a few wins in this respect. Maya Forstater, for example, over the last few weeks and months. I think it's completely extraordinary. And for me, as somebody who has a daughter, and I'm sure you feel the same, these women are extraordinary. These are the icons that we should be looking up to as people who will make the world, when our daughters are older, safer, freer, because they'll be allowed to express their genuine concerns and genuine views.
Well, I think it's misogyny at the top of it. It's misogyny because at the end it's a load of men telling you that I'm a woman, I'm this, and you have to go along with it. No, I don't think so. Right, well, shall we move on? Let's talk about this then, because the first leadership hustings for the Conservative Party members will take place tonight in Leeds.
Yes, it will be the first in a series of hustings taking place across the country in which Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will make their final appeal for votes.
Now, both candidates are expected to reveal more detail on their solutions to the cost of living crisis. Earlier, Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries spoke to GBNews about why she believes Liz Truss will build the foundation for a strong economy.
But I think what we need on September the 5th is somebody who has fresh, invigorating, stimulating ideas and an approach to the economy. I think that's what Liz is offering. She's not somebody who buys into the Treasury orthodoxy. She's someone who thinks economically outside the box. She understands the value of putting money into people's pockets, and you achieve that. One of the ways to achieve that is with those groups of people who work hard and are taxed hard, that the best way to stimulate the economy is to put money back into their pockets. She understands that raising corporation tax to 25% is not the way you encourage investment or innovation or reward those entrepreneurs who create wealth and create jobs. Liz gets all that, and that's one of the reasons why, for me, she's the person I want to see win on September the 5th.
Well, that was Nadine Dorries, Culture Secretary there. And here to give his predictions is columnist and political commentator Benedict Spence. Good morning, Benedict. Liz Truss seems to be ahead at the moment after a couple of leadership sort of debates that were televised. These ones will not be televised, but they will be in front of Tory party members only. Who do you think is going to convince that group?
Good morning. Just very quickly, I apologise if you hear heavy machinery at any point. Somebody above my head has chosen this minute to do some DIY. Liz Truss is quite clearly ahead with the Tory members, but it's not because, as Nadine Dorries says, because she has fresh ideas. It's because she has recycled ideas. She is basically reinterpreting Margaret Thatcher's stand from the 70s and the 80s, and she's repackaging it for today. And, you know, it doesn't come as a great surprise that at a time of serious economic pain, the prospect of tax cuts is very popular, especially amongst Tory members, who do tend to be the people who would benefit the most from tax cuts. So I can't really see beyond her being successful in this election. I don't think that she's a particularly invigorating candidate, but she just ticks all the right boxes on tax. And of course, there's very little that Rishi Sunak can do about that, because he is the Chancellor that has overseen unprecedented levels of tax rises for a Tory government. That's a very difficult circle for him to square. It must be said, though, beyond that, I foresee a lot of trouble. And, you know, it is incredibly frustrating when you hear, for example, Liz Truss talking about going hard on striking unions, because once, you know, of course, that was also, you know, a feature of the Thatcher years, was, you know, fighting the unions and it being very popular. But I think things are very different now. Actually, I think there's a lot more sympathy for strikers, precisely because everybody actually is in a cost of living crisis. It's not just one industry or two industries that's struggling. It is broad. It's across the spectrum. So I think you are on a bit of a hiding to nothing if you decide, rather than, as was the case with Thatcher, you go after one industry that's holding the country to ransom. You decide actually to say sweepingly, I'm going to take on unions carte blanche. You are potentially in a very sticky situation there if things continue to get worse, which, given that a lot of the issues we face are actually beyond the control of the government, is very likely to happen this winter.
Well, Benedict, at least she's given her position. I mean, Keir Starmer is hovering in between the two, so you may say that, but actually, I think you've kind of proved your point the other way, that everybody's in a cost of living crisis. Not everyone can strike. And actually, I'm sick to my back teeth of it all. And so anybody who stands up and says, look, we've had enough of this, we need to set a bar, which is what she's saying, for essential services, I don't think that's a bad thing to say at all.
It's not necessarily a bad thing to say if you can actually come out with a policy that can prove to alleviate the crisis that we're currently in. And I think that this is the main issue, is that Liz Truss is promising tax cuts. Now, yeah, there will be a lot of economic benefit to that. People will feel that in their pocket. But what will be the knock-on effect when it comes to things like services? What will be the knock-on effect when it comes to things like the NHS, which is already barely on its feet? This is the balancing act that Liz Truss will be striking. It's far more of a gamble, I'd say, than Rishi Sunak's position, which is admittedly quite sort of safety first. Liz Truss is really, she's rolling the dice, and it could go very well. It worked out very well for Margaret Thatcher, although the circumstances, as I say, were different. Or actually, people take a look at this politician who has been in government for over 10 years, has held many senior offices of state, and say, well, we don't really take this very seriously because actually you are part of the problem. You have been a member of a series of governments that have led us down this path. Actually, is this what we need right now? Can you fix the situation? Now, on the other hand, of course, she is competing with Rishi Sunak, who is, I think, quite unpopular amongst the Tory members for all the reasons that we've just set out. And Rishi Sunak today has come out to try to make a pitch, to make a play to Tory members about the Green Belt. We won't be building on the Green Belt. There will be no more houses. Why is that popular? Well, it appeals to homeowners. Many Tory members are homeowners, and it's not a particularly popular policy to build on their green and pleasant land. There, I think, is the issue when it comes beyond the Tory party contest itself. When it comes to a general election, you've then got to sort of pivot to appeal to the rest of the country. And right now, what is very popular amongst Tory members is not necessarily what's going to play well in the rest of the country. And I do go back to the example of Thatcher, which is that both candidates have tried to play up their Thatcherite credentials. Boris Johnson won the general election, winning seats in the north of England and the Midlands, working class seats that were the antithesis, diametrically opposed to the concept of Thatcher.
The thing is,
how is that going to play?
Well, Benedict, we will see. We'll see how it plays out. But so far, Rishi Sunak has, I think he's sort of backtracking. Benedict Spence, thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, now after the break, as I was just saying in my monologue a few minutes ago, a tribunal has found that barrister Alison Bailey was discriminated against by her employers, or by her chambers rather, for her gender-critical views. Well, Inaya Falarin Iman will join us to talk to us more about this. That's after this.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, mate. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So Howie in for Real Britain, Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
Good morning, it's 11:30 and this is To The Point with me, Mercy Moroki, and Nana Akua on GB News. We're live on your TV, online and radio.
Now, barrister Alison Bailey has been awarded £22,000 after a tribunal found that she was discriminated against by her employers for her views on gender and women's rights.
Yes, well, her employer, it's her chambers really. Barristers aren't employees, but they said it would be investigating her tweets that rejected the idea that biological sex can change, which caused backlash from groups online, including the LGBTQ+ charity Stonewall.
So here to explain more is our Culture and Social Affairs editor, Anaya Folarin Iman. Right, Anaya, thank you very much for coming in and talking to us. Where did this case begin then?
So Alison Bailey co-founded LGBT Alliance, which is an organisation that campaigns specifically for the rights of lesbian, gay and bisexual people. And they particularly oppose Stonewall, one of the biggest LGBT+ charities' position on gender self-identification, transgender rights. And what the Stonewall position is that anybody, regardless of their biology, should be able to self-identify as a biological sex that is opposite to the one that they were born to. So a man could effectively say that they are a woman and have access to the same rights, protections and spaces as women. And LGBT Alliance, part of the range of different things that they advocate for, one of the things is that they oppose that policy. And when they launched, Alison Bailey said that gender extremism has met its match. And this is the tweet, among other things, that caused controversy and led to some complaints by her barristers' chambers, Garden Court chambers, and led to an investigation. And this is what prompted Alison Bailey to effectively sue them for discrimination. And as has been revealed yesterday at midday, she has won that case against Garden Court Chambers. She lost, however, against Stonewall. She alleged that they had breached the Equality Act over their involvement with the Garden Court Chambers. But many people still see it as a significant victory in relation to bringing awareness, the experiences that many women are having to face, for effectively holding views that seemingly, according to most polls and social attitude surveys, is the mainstream viewpoint from the British public. So it is a victory for many gender-critical feminists.
Honestly, I want to suck my teeth. It's ridiculous that we should even have to defend or fight that position, or that you should be vilified for expressing something that is clearly obvious.
Yeah, it should be pointed out that she didn't win her case against Stonewall, although she did win against her chambers in certain aspects. Stonewall have, of course, released a statement in light of this saying, we're pleased that the Employment Tribunal has ruled in a decision that Stonewall has not been found to have instructed, caused or induced Garden Court Chambers to discriminate against Alison Bailey. Obviously, their PR machine will very much be saying, see, this has got nothing to do with us, and, that they're not at fault, basically. How do you square that circle in saying, well, this is a victory against Stonewall when it's actually legally not, so to speak?
Well, I think that Stonewall has come under increasing scrutiny over the last couple of years for their infamous, some might say, Diversity Champion scheme, which is a workplace diversity scheme over LGBT issues. And many organisations, including many organisations within the government and so on, have recently pulled out of that scheme, claiming that it's either it's not actually delivering.
It's divisive, it's doing the very opposite of what's
but
meant
also
to do.
potentially hostile to different viewpoints. Up until very recently, Stonewall had a policy of no debate when it came to gender self-identification and trans issues. And many people thought that how can you have such influence over government policy, oftentimes behind closed doors, away from democratic scrutiny, without actually being able to discuss these ideas out in the open and in public. And also the BBC did a podcast on Stonewall, which actually revealed a lot of those challenges and difficulties that many people are experiencing in relation to their schemes also. So it has come under greater scrutiny for a lot of its policies. And in that sense, many are seeing that the discussions that have been had about Stonewall's influence on Garden Court chambers has been brought to light in ways that otherwise wouldn't have had if Alison Bailey didn't take that particular legal action. But she's had support from many different people across the political spectrum, including J.K. Rowling, who described her as a heroine. And this is only one case out of a series of cases that have happened over the last few years. We had the Maya Forstater case very recently, which protected gender-critical beliefs as a philosophical belief.
Yeah.
And also we had another one that's coming up very soon by James SS, which will also be looking at the same subject. So many interesting cases.
Well, Garden Court chambers, it has to be said, say, we have maintained throughout that our members hold differing views in the complex debate around trans and sex-based rights. So that's what they have said. But thank you, Anaya. Let's leave that conversation there. Now, after the break, the Met Office says that last year's, quote, unremarkable weather would have actually been near record-breaking in the 80s. We'll discuss what this exactly tells us, and we'll ask an expert after these headlines.
It's 11:35. I'm Olivia Guthrie in the GB newsroom. Legal history has been made today as the sentencing in a criminal trial was shown live on television for the very first time. Judge Sarah Monroe QC's comments were broadcast from the Old Bailey in a manslaughter case. She sentenced Ben Oliver to life in prison with a minimum of 10 years after he pleaded guilty to killing his grandfather in South London. Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss are going head-to-head in Leeds tonight in the first round of 12 Tory hustings. Tax and spending are expected to be the big battlegrounds as the leadership candidates tour the country, hoping to secure party members' votes. The ballot to decide who gets the keys to number 10 closes on September the 2nd. Speaking in Leeds, Liz Truss says it's not time for another windfall tax to help with the cost of energy bills.
I understand that families are really struggling at this time. We've seen a rise in global energy prices. That's why I would reverse the national insurance increase, putting more money back into people's pockets, but also have a temporary moratorium on the green levy to cut people's energy bills. But what we also need to do is making sure we produce more domestically produced gas so that we are able to increase supply and keep prices as low as possible.
The 22nd Commonwealth Games will start in Birmingham tonight. The opening ceremony, which begins at 8 p.m. at the Alexander Stadium, will be attended by the Prince of Wales. Tom Daley is among those carrying the Queen's baton to kick off the Games. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
A quick snapshot of today's markets for you. The pound buys you $1.214 and 1.194 euros. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,434 and 93 pence per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV.
On radio.
On digital. Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation.
We are not part of the establishment. We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
My name's Tom Harwood and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Where would you like to go?
Just take me to the studio, please, Matt. You know where you're going. I've got a show to do. Friday Night Feast on GB News, 7 p.m. And it's like nothing you've ever seen before. We take a different angle on the week's biggest news stories. The viewers and listeners set me some absolutely mad challenges to do. We tried to rehome a rescue dog. And yes, there's some other wacky stuff in there as well. I feel like I could take on the world. Well, that's that. Friday Night Feast with me, Patrick Christie's, every Friday, 7 till 9 p.m. on GB News. Be there.
Good morning. If you just joined us, where have you been? It's just coming up to 41 minutes after 11 o'clock. This is To The Point with Mercy Moroki and me, Nana Akwe, on GB News. We're live on TV, online and on digital radio.
Yes, now the cost of living is certainly biting, but you might not be able to get your teeth stuck into the 99p McDonald's cheeseburger anymore if you're looking to eat cheaply.
Now, the fast food giant has increased the price of several items on the menu, raising the price of its signature cheeseburger for the first time in 14 years, taking it to £1.19.
Yes, well, Tom Harwood, our political correspondent, took to the streets to see how the public reacted to the news.
We've come here to Paddington Station today, no, not for the RMT picket line and the train strikes, but a potentially much more pressing and more permanent issue. The price of a 99p cheeseburger has risen by 20%.
It's going up, little bit more, but not too much, but it's going up.
Do you blame McDonald's for the price rises?
Well, so far I can't blame them. It's about the crisis, you know? Yeah, so they have to work with the crisis. So, you know, them doing good. We can't really blame them, you know? It's a crisis.
Simply blame the government. They've made a complete hash of things. So everybody's got to balance their books, and that means companies have to do the same. There's not a good politician in that House of Commons, so we need everybody thrown out and restarted again.
Ain't their fault, is it? All the food's gone up, all the petrol's gone up, everything's going up, so I blame the big companies who's putting the prices up or making everyone put them up, you see what I'm saying? They might earn £50 million or £1 billion every year. Why can't you earn £45 billion and keep the prices the same? Why don't they take the cut in their profits rather than us?
Oh, prices go up also, but we manage, but the wages don't go up, so.
So there we have it, a sense of acceptance from the public, at least outside this Paddington McDonald's, but also a sense that this is a global problem, a problem outside of the hands, perhaps, of McDonald's itself. Prices are going up just about everywhere we can see.
That is Tom Harwood there reporting about the prices of the increased cheeseburger at McDonald's. I don't eat that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I don't look like I do, but I am. I frequent McDonald's. I'm a frequenter there, and the drive-through is fantastic. I will not apologise for how much I love McDonald's, but. Of course, the fact is 99p to begin with, I mean, is quite staggering and suspicious, let's be honest. You know, I'm not suggesting there's any wrongdoing on the part of McDonald's, but it's a bargain to begin with.
Well, I'm not surprised.
So, £1.19, it's not going to break the bank.
No, and I'm not surprised they ditched the clown. I mean, who'd take food from a clown?
That Ronald McDonald
yeah, it was
clown.
A clown. If a clown offered you a burger, you would run. You wouldn't go, oh, I'll eat that burger.
It sounds like the plot to a horror movie.
I know, isn't it?
Opening scene to a horror movie. But how do you feel about McDonald's raising the price of their cheeseburger? If it's just the cheeseburger, because to be honest, some of their prices are quite extortionate these days on a meal. I don't
know. I don't think they're that bad. I mean, you know.
No, I mean, look, £6, £7 for a burger meal. No, not for me. Well, although I still do pay that.
But I think, you know, look, horses for courses.
Pies.
Yeah.
Anyway. Let's move on to something else. Now, the Met Office has said that last year's comparatively unremarkable temperatures to those we've seen this year would have actually been near record-breaking just a few decades ago.
They say the 2021 events, such as the record heat in Northern Ireland Storm Arwen and October's heavy rains are prime examples of extreme weather that signals how the climate is indeed changing.
Yes, but with last year's temperatures, which is what people are most concerned about when they discuss global warming, were all near normal compared with the last 2 decades.
So joining us now to discuss what this means is Bob Ward. He's the Policy and Communications Director at the Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and Environment. Thanks for talking to us, Bob. So, Bob, a lot of people talking about climate change. Your view on why the climate is changing? Obviously, I believe it will change naturally, but is something making it change more radically than it would normally, in your view?
Yeah, these figures from the Met Office provide a clear indication of a trend in our climate, that it is getting warmer, that last year, which seemed quite unremarkable by recent standards, would have been the second warmest year on record in the UK before 1990. And it's a measure that our average temperature is increasing, and indeed our experiences of maximum temperatures is that we've seen in the last couple of weeks that's changing as well. It also means that extreme cold days are becoming less common in winter, and our climate is also becoming wetter. We're seeing winters and summers both being wetter, which is a bit ironic given that we're talking about the potential for drought. But what's happening is a warmer atmosphere holds more moisture, which means when it rains, it tends to rain harder.
Listen, Bob, there's loads of reports blaming the rise in CO2 for this, and something that many believe that we are causing, in a sense. What's your view on that?
Yeah, it's fairly clear. Scientists have been looking at this for a long time. The only explanation that you can reach for the rise in temperature and the impacts on climate is the rising greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Remember that the atmosphere we have around us is what keeps the temperature of the Earth much warmer than it would be. Without our atmosphere, the surface of the Earth would be about minus 18 degrees. So the carbon dioxide and the water vapor in the atmosphere is what keeps it warm. We are increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere primarily through the burning of fossil fuels, and that is what is driving the warming. And there's no other reasonable explanation.
No. But what about?
Have looked at the other explanations, and they just don't work.
Yeah, but then if humans cause the CO2, which is driving the climate change, what drove the climate change? Change before that, then? Because apparently we only contribute 3.5% of CO2, and the rest, so 96.5%, is natural. So this teeny tiny thing that we contribute, you're saying is the thing that drives the climate change.
Yeah, but remember, the natural carbon dioxide you talked about has elevated the temperature of the Earth by 32 degrees, right? Without it, it would be minus 18 degrees. So we've increased the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. We've increased it by about 50% since the industrialization started, and that has raised it a further 1 degree. So carbon dioxide makes a very big difference to the temperature of the Earth. The fact that it's risen by a relatively small amount compared to naturally occurring carbon dioxide isn't a measure that it shouldn't be causing any difference. It's that it shows how sensitive the Earth's temperature is to the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And it's absolutely clear that rise is down primarily to the burning of fossil fuels.
Yeah, but your stuff is all done on models, isn't it? So it's all modelling. I mean, we could be wrong, because it's cyclical, isn't it? But it's all models. Where is it
really isn't. It really isn't, Nana, because look, the first experiments were carried out in 1859 by a scientist called John Tyndall. He used in a lab to show that gases like carbon dioxide and water vapor tend to trap infrared heat. And that was what gave us the first explanation for why the surface of the Earth is warmer. And ever since then, the evidence has been mounting that both carbon dioxide levels are going up and that temperature is going up. Now, carbon dioxide is the primary driver, There are other factors that make a difference to the temperature as well. But the thing that drove previous changes in temperature, such as the Ice Age, were things like changes in the Earth's orbit.
Well,
And
that's what I was going to say.
that, and it's clear that that is not happening at the moment.
Yeah, but we might have missed something, though. This could be like diesel and petrol. You know, we thought diesel, there's something that we missed in the diesel fuel. Why? I mean, is there actually any evidence, seriously, that there's a causal link between CO2 and temperature? Because as far as I've seen, it's all modelling, and the modelling could be wrong, just like the modelling that we had for COVID.
No, I've just explained the experiments were carried out in 1859. It's been added up.
The Earth has been here
then.
for billions and billions of years.
Laboratory. It's not a model.
Yeah, but the Earth has been here for millions and millions of years, you know. So it's, you know, like if you did an experiment with 100 people and there's like millions of people, you wouldn't say the results from this little 100 years is the whole. I mean, where are we getting all this from? How do we know that it is CO2? And are we looking to see if there are other factors and anything that we might have missed?
Yeah, scientists have been looking at all the other factors and measuring the impact they have on the temperature. So, for instance, any changes in the sun, the output of energy by the suns can be measured. And we can see very clearly that cannot explain the rise in temperature we've been seeing. Similarly, some people have tried to explain it through cosmic rays from outer space affecting cloud cover. But again, there's no evidence that the Earth is becoming less cloudy, or indeed that the cosmic rays that are supposed to be deflected by the sun's magnetic field is responsible. I mean, essentially, it's like trying to search for another explanation. It's like ignoring the most obvious thing in front of us. We have known for a long time that carbon dioxide in the atmosphere traps heat around the Earth. That's the only reason it's habitable.
What about feedback, though? Because, you know, when you do something, there's a cause and reaction. Of course, how does the modelling consider the feedback of the Earth? So you might say, oh, well, if it stays this way, but the Earth may well have been going in a certain direction anyway, and then there'll be a feedback. So whatever happens, so if there's more CO2, the Earth might emit this or it might emit that. Has your modelling taken into account the natural feedback that the Earth will give for the chemicals that are exposed into it?
Yeah, so you're quite right that you do need a model to look forward and predict how much warmer the Earth can be. But the basic physics about whether carbon dioxide is warming the Earth is known from experiments. If you go forward, you have to take into account feedbacks, like you said. Things like cloud cover can affect the overall temperature. And that is trying to predict future cloud cover is indeed can be tricky. So when they do modelling of future temperature towards the end of the century, they have large temperature ranges. But remember, the Earth is already warmed by about 1 degree since industrialization. And what we're trying to work out is if we carry on burning fossil fuels at the current rate, where might we end up by the end of the century? What looks fairly certain is that by middle of this century, the average temperature of the Earth will have reached about 1.5 degrees. And depending on what we do about emissions, it will either kind of level off maybe below 2 degrees or may get up to 4 or 5 degrees. Now, that kind of change would be very, very dramatic on the Earth. It would change almost everything, including sea levels. The last time the Earth was about 3 degrees warmer than today was about 3 million years ago. The polar ice caps were much smaller, and sea level was 5 to 25 meters higher.
Yeah, we will have to leave it there, Bob Ward. Policy.
It's always interesting, Bob, talking to you. Thank you very much for it.
It's always a
Policy
pleasure
and
to talk to you
Communications
both.
Director at the
you.
Grantham Research Institute on Climate Change and the environment there. I think it's...
What do you think about all
well,
that?
I'm a bit of a... Well, I say a bit. I'm a big statistics nerd, and I hear what you're saying about models. And with the modelling for climate change and predicting sort of where we'll be in 50, 100 years' time, the issue I have with the modelling is that it relies on variables, millions of variables. When you're trying to model something like the temperature of the Earth in 50 years' time, you have to include so many variables. Just a small margin of error extended over 50, 100 years can give you wildly inaccurate results. So I wouldn't take the models that we see as gospel, because I think that would be irresponsible. We just simply don't know. There's too many variables.
There's so much pressure on you to accept that that's the way it is, that's the way. And I whilst I hear that yes, if the Earth warms and this is what the scenario could be, I question it, and I question it because I think that there may be other alternatives or something that's been missed. And I suspect that the Earth is cyclical. It is cyclical. It has its own way, and it's all about balance. And sometimes, if you interfere the balance of something, you might find an even worse consequence, and you may not have factored that in.
Yeah, and very finally, just some interesting statistics on this subject. So these are from the Office for National Statistics, from death registration data for England and Wales. And it says over a 20-year period, the estimated change in deaths associated with warm or cold temperature has actually gone down over that 20-year period by 555,000. So an average of 27,755 deaths per year, basically. So it's going over the last 2 decades, the deaths associated with climate change in England and Wales, or rather warm and cold temperatures, has gone down. So
I just don't think
I'm very
enough.
hesitant to accept this sort of...
No. Because I think, first of all, especially with the fires, it was terrible. But when you do get to temperatures like that, that will happen. But also, people were silly. People were starting fires, which you would not start a fire near a tinderbox, and that's what a lot of people didn't understand it. But I've got to say, you know, obviously the planet may be warming on its own anyway, and we might have something to do with it, we might not. But that argument and that discussion will roll on.
Yes, indeed it will. But now a little reminder that every Wednesday we hand over our show to you. We ask you to send in suggestions for what you want us to talk about, and we deliver. The entire show becomes your show. So please tell us what subjects you want to see us talking about next Wednesday. The email is tothepoint@gbnews.uk. That's where you can get those suggestions into.
Well, listen, that's it from us here at To The Point. It's been a pleasure. I'm back actually tomorrow to do my own show between 4 and 6. Make sure you join me, but don't go anywhere, because up next it's Gloria with the brief.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest forecast. Often cloudy across much of the UK through Thursday. There is the risk of some heavy showers, particularly across Dumfries and Galloway, but on the warm side. Looking at the pressure pattern, high pressure still dominates the weather across the UK, giving largely settled conditions. Wide isobars there indicating light winds too. However, there is quite a lot of cloud trapped underneath this high pressure, so fairly grey skies across the UK. The risk of a few showers across western areas. Some heavy showers possible across eastern parts of Northern Ireland, the Borders region, Dumfries and Galloway. So perhaps 15-20 mils of rain falling in short periods of time. So it's worth keeping an eye on the forecast and the heavy showers here. Temperature-wise, generally high teens to low 20s, 24 or 25 across the southeast. Through Thursday evening, a lot of cloud across the UK. Still some heavy downpours across northern parts of England, southern parts of Scotland into the early hours. Perhaps clouds stretching a little bit further south into the Pennines, 1 or 2 splashes of rain, but generally elsewhere dry. And temperature-wise, generally at the mid to low teens. So overall, still another fairly mild night. So a warm start to Friday morning. More in the way of sunshine, though, across southern parts of England and Wales. The cloud bubbling up as the day goes on. Still fairly cloudy down the spine of the country. The risk of some rain at first, but this petering out later. 1 or 2 showers developing by the afternoon, but plenty of sunny spells around and lots of places staying dry. Temperatures reaching 26 or 27 towards the southeast, which is 81 in Fahrenheit. So feeling quite warm in that sunshine. Through the evening time, a change slowly on the way. Cloud and outbreaks of rain starting to move into Northern Ireland, western Scotland. Elsewhere, generally dry to end Friday. Just 1 or 2 light showers are possible. And then that